Oh, great. All right. Well, welcome everybody to our second webinar. Jody has got a bit of a problem with her voice. She's been rather overdoing it the last 2 days with clinics, clearly shouting at people in the whispering loudly to people in the clinic. Anyway, we're going to work through that, and today we're talking about two important things. The first one is about how to learn your dressage test, and that's going to be really interesting. Jody's going to give us a few shortcuts on how to learn them, because sometimes it can seem a little bit overwhelming having to learn all those patterns, especially when you're not familiar with them. And the other thing is how to present yourself on the day. So I asked Jody if it was all right for me to wear my purple riding jacket, and she looked at me like, so we're going to talk about that. And I think Jody's going to give us some examples as well of how what you wear and how you present your horse changes at different levels, and also, perhaps what sort of competition you're going to. So welcome everyone, and welcome Jody. I'm going at the end of the session, so Jody's going to mostly talk for 15-20 minutes, and then we're just going to open it up for Q&A. So if you have some questions, you can write them in the chat. You can just save them up and raise your hand. I'm going to ask you to mute yourself while Jody chats, just so that we can hear Jody properly. All right. So Jody, over to you.
So yeah, I thought we would start. Oh, look, my voice is quite good. I thought we would start with how to learn a dressage test, because I think that is something that a lot of people really, really struggle with. I've got my own methods, and I think depending on what type of kind of learner you are, one way will suit someone more than another. So I think we've just got to get someone muted there. I can hear birds chirping. Who do we need to mute? Can you do it at your end there, Kate? That's better. Great. The birds are clearly not here because it's far too rainy to have any birds anywhere nearby. So yeah, there is definitely a skill to learning a dressage test. I think I've got that skill pretty sorted. I do occasionally make a course error, but the great thing about dressage compared to jumping is the arena stays the same. For instance, the Grand Prix test I would do at a local or regional show here in New Zealand, it's exactly the same Grand Prix test I would do if I was at the Olympics or the World Champs or anywhere else in the world. So I don't have to turn up to that big competition and think, what are they going to have in front of me today? Whereas if I go to a show jump show, I've got no way to prepare that in my head. I've got to get there and learn a brand new course. And the same with working equitation. I might know what obstacles we could encounter, but I don't know the order and the layout of them. And that's one beautiful thing with dressage, is that I know exactly where the arena letters are going to be every single time. I know how big my arena is going to be, and I've got a copy of the test before I show up. So that for me makes it a whole heap easier than having to learn a jump off course, having to learn a course, having to learn a different one with the same jumps in it 10 minutes later type thing. So I think we're quite lucky in that sense. I also think we're lucky in that one of my little secrets is I often go to the toilet just before, it's a bit of personal information, just before I get on my horse, and every toilet door is the exact same kind of shape as my dressage arena will be. So I can easily go through, with that shape there in front of me of where I'm going to be. Also, a placemat on your table, the regular kind of placemats. A lovely ex-boyfriend of mine, he used to, when he was a pony club kid, all of their placemats had, on the underside of them, had all the dressage letters, and they used to go and learn their tests, at the dinner table type thing. So I think that's one way that makes it a lot easier for us. One You will see people also like in their lounge room putting the markers out and literally trotting through the test and cantering through the test themselves. And that can really help some types of learner to actually walk through the test. And I will do that when I'm visualizing a test before I go in. I will often just in my horse truck and in my lorry go through the test. I don't need a big area at all. I can visualize and just step it out, but I just take tiny steps. But I can actually go through my test almost in real time. Like when you're visualizing your test, you can go through and take 5 minutes to get through the whole test rather than just sort of whizzing through it. I can walk with very small steps, or, I'm cantering in up my center line, and I'm almost doing it on the spot. I don't need much room, but then I can halt, and then I can visualize trotting off again. And I just take little tiny footprints almost on the spot, and then I'll turn right, and then I will do my circle. And you can, kind of with your feet marching as your horse's feet would be doing. That's also quite a good way to visualize your test and remember your test kind of in real time without needing to practice it on your horse. But I think that's quite a good way to feel your horse, to see what would be your horse's ears, to feel the reins, and to think about not only where you're going, which is one skill of remembering your test, but actually how you're going to ride your horse in each of those parts of the test. And part of learning that helps you really get into the flow of it all. And I think it takes quite a long time for most of us to be able to be inside the arena, be in the test, and actually think, I'm okay, I'm doing this, I can breathe. And I remember distinctly hoping for many years that one day in a pre-St. George level test, I would be able to just take a breath and be in the test. And I still remember the showgrounds where that happened, Telsey Park in Palmerston North. I remember the corner of the arena where I suddenly went, I'm in the test, rather than thinking, oh God, what's next? So that's a really cool spot to be in.
Really interesting what you said there and the examples you've used. And you said rather than practicing it on your horse. And I remember being told years ago by a dressage judge, who was giving me a lesson, and she said, if you have to practice the test on your horse, make sure you always do the walk 3 times. So you end up in the same place, but your horse is less likely to anticipate the canter at sea or whatever it might be. And more likely to maintain the walk because it just starts to think it walks for a long time. So that was a really interesting point. And do you think that you're better off not practicing on the horse, or do you think if you do practice on the horse, you should not do everything at a marker? What's your strategy with that?
Yeah, there is, quite a bit of anecdotal evidence that, the more you practice the test on the horse, the more the horse may anticipate. But to mix it up, you can either practice a variety of tests. I think going through a test from start to finish with your coach, or getting someone to video it and send it to a coach, or just video it and review it yourself is really important. But I think sometimes you can overdo it in terms of the horse needing to learn the test type thing. So the horse can start to anticipate the more you do it. So you can either do it on different horses, you can watch other people do it in real time. That's a good thing to do when you go to a showgrounds. Actually go and sit at your arena and watch that test being ridden can help you. Although there's a couple of things with that. Sometimes if I go and I watch and everyone's really good, it puts me off. And if they're really bad, I'm like, oh, I hope that doesn't happen to me. You've got to keep it as a positive experience. And sometimes it can put you off wanting to compete at all when you see someone much flasher than you turning up and doing their test. But also, if you watch them, you can start to go, okay, even Heath Ryan made a mistake in those 2 tempi changes, or, someone is beatable because I can see where they've kind of gone wrong. So it depends a little bit on your competition mindset. But one thing I do at home is swap my arena around. So I make sure I don't really rely on the letters, like I know where they are, but I can also do my test from the other end of the arena. So I'm kind of using where the letters are, but not the letters themselves. And that helps the horse not anticipate so much. Or I will just practice the canter work, or just practice the trot work, or just practice the walk. So I learn how those movements flow from one to another. Often there's things in the test that until you've ridden it, you don't realize how quickly that comes up. So in New Zealand, one of the prelim level tests, the hardest one, has a transition where you come up and you have to come out of the walk, I think it is, and you need to trot and then immediately canter. And you just don't realize on a horse at that level how hard that is. So it's really good to practice aspects of the test and really realize how quickly, like what are the things in this test I really have to watch for that could surprise my horse, or, could surprise us. Where do we need to prepare extra? And where are kind of the more easy bits that are just going to flow through. So in that way, practicing is quite important.
I think that's one of the things you highlight in the course as well, when you talk about how to ride 20-meter circles and that sort of thing, and how to ride the sort of a quarter of the 20-meter circle at a time, and rather than trying to ride the whole circle, and how that looks from the judge's perspective and things. So I suppose practicing those, as you said, just one element at a time, maybe crossing the diagonal in a certain way, can really help break it down. Yeah. That's good. That's really helpful. All right. So what about?
Sorry.
Yep. No. Go on.
So when I'm looking at the tests, I think people can get quite overwhelmed by the whole thing, and a lot of it just is practice. But most of the tests mirror each other more or less on each side. So I like to learn. You'll generally have the trot work, then maybe the walk, then the canter work. Or you might have the trot work, the walk, a stretchy circle in the trot, and then the canter work. Like there might be something that kind of breaks it up. And I like to learn the tests in parts like that. So I try and not get too bogged down, and this is just my way. I try and not get too bogged down with the kind of finer details, if you like, of the test. So if I go through here, I'm looking at the New Zealand test novice 2B, and it says to enter at the working trot, halt, salute, proceed in working trot, track right. So in my head, I just think in track right. I know there's going to be a hold. I don't have to think, and then it's my hold. And like I kind of commit that just to my background, so I don't get bogged down with it's the hold and then it's the thing. I'm just like in, go right. That's the first thing to remember, is which way do I turn at the start? And plenty of people get into the ring and they're like, oh boy, which way am I turning? And, that's a problem right from the beginning. So I just think in, turn right. This test starts with a lengthening of the stride from M to V. So I might, instead of thinking M to V, I might have a word in my head. So I use just like a word association thing. So MV for me stands for Monte Velo, which is a famous Portuguese stud. It was all I could think of at the time that had like the MV initials, but I could think of motor vehicle. So rather than thinking, getting into there and thinking, shit, which letter do I go to? I'm like, it's MV, or I call that the 3/4 diagonal. So it's not a full diagonal, it's the 3/4 diagonal. So now I'm thinking in right 3/4 diagonal, or in right Monte Velo or motor vehicle or whatever that is, to lengthen the stride and trot. And then it's a half circle at the bottom of the arena rather than thinking at K, because in my brain, even though I've been doing dressage for a long, long time now, I probably rode my first test about 40 years ago, I still have to really think like, K, is that the one in that corner or that corner? I know it's one of the quarter markers, but it doesn't automatically come up in my brain as the bottom left-hand quarter marker. So when I learn my test, I just think, yeah, okay, that's down in the bottom, a half circle 10 meters. And I don't even need to think it's a half circle left like the test says, because it's pretty obvious when I get there, it's a half circle left or I'd be leaving the arena. So a half circle left, and then D to L working trots. So, D to L, and L is in the middle of the arena. So I think up one marker, and then it's a leg yield to the right. And I know whichever way I will have turned onto the center line will be the way I leg yield. So I don't need to have done that, done the half circle and then think, oh God, next is my leg yield. Is it that way or that way? It is always the way the horse was already bending on the circle. So that's already kind of in my subconscious. So now I'm thinking in right, 3/4 diagonal, half circle, up one marker, leg yield. I'm not getting bogged down with, oh my goodness, where is L? I know it's just 12 meters further on than where my circle finished. Now, this is just the way my brain works, and I probably apologize. I have some sort of ADHD adult thing going on where my brain is always very busy. So I just think up one marker, do a leg yield, and then it just repeats itself. So HP, the 3/4 diagonal, and I might think of HP source or something like that. The same as before, lengthen, half circle, up one marker, leg yield back the other way. And that is all the trot work in the test. So now I'm like in right, 3/4 diagonal, half circle, up one, leg yield, 3/4 diagonal with the lengthening, half circle, up one marker, leg yield. And I just go through that and through that and through that until that's absolutely in my head and I can say it at 1,000,000 miles an hour. In right, 3/4 diagonal with the lengthen, half circle, up one, leg yield, I've got the same. So I learn the trot and then I learn the walk. The walk in this test goes from C to M, medium walk, which is really normal at that level. And again, that funny old diagonal MV, the same one we did at the start, is my free walk on a long rein. And then back into trot at K, so down one marker, into trot and canter at A. And then I'll remember just the walk. So the walk is a short amount of medium walk, the funny diagonal or the 3/4 diagonal or my Monte Velo, my lengthen walk or my extended free walk in this case, and then trot, canter. And then I might go through with my starting from the beginning again. In right, 3/4 diagonal, half circle, up one, leg yield, 3/4 diagonal, half circle, up one, leg yield. Then I add my walk, 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 walk. Perfect. And then I learn my canter the same way. So that for some people may resonate if you have a brain that works the same as mine. And for other people, I've probably just told you the most confusing thing you've ever heard. But yeah, that for me really works. And then each test I go into, I just remember, this is the one with the loops in the canter, or this is the one with the serpentine. So each test has its own kind of flavor that tells it apart from the other test you'll probably be doing on that day. Because we often do, in New Zealand at least, we often do different tests in a day and different tests over the weekend. But when I've been competing in America, we actually did the same test twice in the day, which was actually quite a cool way to do it. And you could really learn from what you may have done wrong or things you needed to improve on, and you got to do it again with a different judge and a different set of circumstances that day. But I guess those are my biggest tips, to remember that the test does always mirror itself. It just may have connecting things like the walk, and the walk might be a full diagonal, a 3/4 diagonal, or 2 short diagonals. And that's how I remember it in my head, rather than having to remember what letter. Like when I go through my tests, it's another good thing to do is go through your test with someone who will be looking at the book, and you say, right. And the trouble with me doing that is I don't go by the letters. So I'm like, okay, first it's in and turn right. And they're like, you forgot to halt. I'm like, no, I've got the halt. And then I'm like, turn the corner, you go across the 3/4 diagonal. And then they're reading going, is that M to V? And I'm like, I don't actually know. I just know I go right and I do the 3/4 diagonal. So it sort of helps if you have a friend who is, as knowledgeable as you or more knowledgeable than you. Like if someone said that to me, I'll be like, yep, that's exactly where you're going. Yep. The tests in New Zealand have these, or some of them at least, have little handy pictures there. I don't know if you can see that show you where you're going, and that can really help people as well to learn their test. Or it can at least help the person if you're telling them where you're going and it's your mum or your friend who's not really into dressage. If they look at the pictures as you're telling them, that can help you check that you're on the same wavelength as you go through that test. It also helps to have a copy of the test even small, either on your phone or if you've got your phone in your pocket. And if you do, you should probably turn it to flight mode when you're competing, because I've had mine ring several times as I'm going around the arena, which can be distracting. But if you have a small copy of that test and either have it with someone on the ground that's that's there to take your horse's boots off or give you a drink of water or whatever, there's nothing worse than getting out in the warm-up arena and having a sudden like, holy shit, I can't remember where I'm going. But if you can pull that test out of your pocket and have a quick like, yep, I've got it, just before you go in, it can help sort of settle those nerves. So I like to have the test with me in some way, shape or form before I go in, or be able to say to someone, and I've even asked a fellow competitor, like, oh my God, what do we do after which way do we turn after the free walk or whatever, providing that person's quite friendly and doesn't want to sabotage you. You can, just get that last tip off them, or quickly as you're warming up, watch someone else in that ring and check where they're going, just to settle those nerves and make sure you've got your course sorted.
Great. All right. Well, thank you. That's very good. Let's move quickly on to presentation, how to present yourself and your horse, and then we can open it up for questions. So save your questions up, and we'll just get Jody to talk. Let's start sort of, the course talks about prep or intro level and then prelim level. So what are we looking at, first of all, there for presentation of use? What should you wear, and should you plait your horse? And I think we've got those sorts of questions.
Yeah, no, I think you have to be really certain of the rules in your particular country. So in the course, I think we've got links to the rules for USA, England, Australia, New Zealand. So you have to be very familiar and know that these rules do get updated every year. The changes in the dress code in dressage in New Zealand since I've been involved, I don't even know what they are because they change all the time. It used to be so pedantic that even you couldn't have piping, or you could have piping on your collar that was contrasting, but not on your lapel or not on your pockets or something like that. So you do need to kind of keep up to date with those rules. And we're about to go through another set of rule changes in Dressage New Zealand. We have a conference next week and they will be discussing the rules and different coloured jodhpurs or jackets and what hue of jacket you're allowed and all of that. So things have changed and I would hate to put anybody wrong. And the same with things like plaiting. So the dressage rules did state that you weren't allowed any decorations on your horse. So for instance, you can't put tinsel in its tail, even if it's at Christmas time and it's a Christmas show. Dressage is not a fancy dress kind of competition, although there may be a fancy dress competition at a particular show you go to. So I would always plait unless it's a winter They've made it quite clear that it's kind of a casual day. And even if it is a super casual day, I would always have a neatly pulled mane, or, having the horse's mane and tail brushed, always have oil on the feet. Again, that's not a rule, but presentation is important. So I always have them plaited unless it's a very local, low-key kind of a day. Kate's got a few pictures there. You can see here I'm riding Kyla, who used to own this mare for a short time before I stole her back, is here on the call, so she will recognise the gorgeous Jamaica. So this is a level, I'm probably riding at level 4 in this case. The helmets are compulsory, and we have helmet tagging. So your helmet does have to show at the moment, I think it's a red sticker, but there's about to be new helmet rules introduced, and they now have to be yellow stickered, and that could be the same in your country. So that's definitely something to watch for. I always try and have a helmet that matches the same color as my jacket. And here I'm wearing what we call a short coat, or a regular riding jacket. And you can see I've got the horse's dressage number is on. So most of us, most competitions, we have to have a number on. I like to have that on the saddle cloth and not on the bridle of the horse. I think, for me personally, it's a huge disrespect to your horse to have a blooming big number stuck to its head. I just think it detracts from the beauty of your horse, and I really don't like the look of it. So I always have my number on my saddle cloth, and I've also got my sponsor's logo there on the saddle cloth. So part of the contract I have with my particular sponsor is the logo on the saddle cloth. But again, there are various rules around that. You can't just have anything on your saddle cloth. A lot of the time our sponsors have to be logged with our national federation. So I can't just put Can Do Equine, and a big Can Do Equine thing on my saddle cloth. I have, there's a certain size that has to be, and sometimes we actually need to have a certain level of sponsorship, like a certain payment that has had to have been made, and you have to show proof of that to your national federation before you can just put that on your saddle cloth. Those bridle numbers, I just saw the question there, they are attached via Velcro onto, I have a little tab I sew onto my saddle cloth and then put the Velcro that's already on the number through it and attach it on, so that I don't just try and pin the number on, because it's annoying and the pins often come undone. So I actually have a permanent tab on my saddle cloth that I can put that number through and stick it to. Some people actually get their numbers embroidered onto the saddle cloth so that they're there permanently. And that's in a country like New Zealand, where we have the same number every time. At other shows, I think in Australia, you have a number that you're given for the show. So you have a little slotted kind of number holder that you put your numbers in for the show. But again, I would make sure that's securely attached in a kind of semi-permanent way to my saddle cloth, not just pinned on. So for me, dressage comes from the military, and that's why we wear a uniform. I am really not into too much bling, too much brightly coloured anything when I'm doing dressage. So for me, it's about respect to the where the sport has come from the military. In the military, you all dress the same. You're not allowed to go, well, I'd really like purple hair and I want my hair flowing and I want to have a very short jacket and I want to do this and I want to be in bright pink. That's not what the military is about. And for me, that's not what dressage is about. So no matter how much they loosen the dress code, I believe I will always dress in a way that respects where the foundations of the sport, where it's come from. And I'm there to show off my horse. So I'm not there to decorate my horse with the biggest brow band and the fanciest noseband. I want nothing to detract the judge from being able to look at the quality of my training and what's happening there. So even if bright pink gloves were allowed, I don't feel myself that the dressage arena is the place to wear that. But there will be plenty of people out there that really enjoy being able to look a little different. For me, the dressage arena is not that place. So, Kate, if you want to flick through a few of those other pictures, you can see there, well, you can't see, so in this photo, you can't see that the hooves were painted, but I will never go out without hoof oil on the horses. Even out hunting, the horses don't go out without hoof oil on. We have to be careful at FEI level competition that we're not allowed to paint the feet of the horse black. If the horse has, like Alibaba that you see where his white sock is, that hoof is a striped hoof on that side. If I brought him to a trot up and I'd blackened that hoof, he no longer looks like the horse that his passport says, and I can actually be disciplined or not allowed to compete because I've changed his description, if you like, than what was on the passport. You'll often see in showing they'll paint a star on the horse to make it. I really don't know. It's just not really my thing. I don't want to change the beauty that is my horse in the way it was born. I don't dye his coat. He has this fantastic bronzed coat, or did have he's kind of lost it now that he's gelded and has turned into an older gentleman. But other than giving them a really good wash beforehand, I don't want to alter the horse's appearance. That said, his tail in this photo is dyed because it goes a very, very manky orange color, and he does look more impressive with that black, but I would never dye his coat so that my dark brown horse is now jet black. I try and present them as naturally as possible. So in that previous photo, you see I was wearing a top hat. It's quite a controversial thing. I loved wearing a top hat. It was always a dream of mine to get to the level of dressage where you could wear a top hat and tails. People would say to me, oh, doesn't that set a bad example for kids because you're not wearing a helmet? You will basically never find a photo of me on a horse without a helmet unless I'm in my tailcoat at a competition. I don't think a teenager looking at this photo will then go and jump their horse with a baseball hat on. I don't really see that correlation. Having said that, if I thought there was, I've ridden back when we could choose between a top hat and a helmet, there were certainly horses I would always wear a helmet on in competition if there was any chance of anything sort of happening. But now it's compulsory for us to wear helmets. I don't like it myself, but I'm slowly getting used to it. I just find it's very hard to find a helmet that suits my head with a tailcoat, but that's just me being old-fashioned. And yeah, so again in this picture, I always use just a plain white saddlecloth. We have a special cut we like to use for dressage that looks a bit more dressage-y, but even if a brown saddlecloth was allowed, I don't think being in the dressage ring is the place to do that. So always a light or a pale coloured stock. My jackets are always blue. I don't wear a black jacket. A lot of people suit the black more. I think the blue is a softer colour. But here, yeah, we're in the tailcoat, and he's got a bit of a sparkly brow band on. And you can see he does have what looks like a number there, but it's actually a stallion tag, which in New Zealand is compulsory and must be worn on the bridle. So I've made mine as little and as dainty as possible, not the big regulation square things they would like plastered on the stallion's head, which for me, again, detracts from the beauty of the horse. Actually, I tell a lie, that is a black jacket there. I must have had a bad day. This was Alibaba as a very young horse. He's in the warm-up, so he has bandages and boots on, which I sometimes do in the warm-up. And back then you were allowed your stallion tag on your saddlecloth, which now has to be on the bridle. He has a long Spanish plait there. That was back when he had a very long mane. I never plait the tail of the dressage horse. The dressage horse, you want to kind of have as full a tail as possible. So if we are pulling the tail, we only pull the very top part of the tail and try and have a really full looking tail. A plaited tail, again, it's a little bit of fashion thing, but also a tightly plaited tail can make the horse a little bit tight behind. You want the horse to have a swinging back, a nice flowing swinging tail, and having a tightly plaited tail is not kind of the look we want to go for. Again, here just seeing, I've got some pearls on this is a pre-tied stock I'm wearing. So there's a little bit of detailing there, but it is still a very plain kind of a look. I look very pensive. I'm probably hoping like hell I've just won my test. And definitely, yeah, hairnet. You can see a little wisp of hair out. You should always wear a hairnet if you have any sort of long hair in dressage, really, or in jumping. For me, that's a massive part of presentation, is having that hair tucked away, tied away, plaited away, so that again you're not distracting and drawing away from the horse. We used to have a rule that our gloves had to be white. In New Zealand, that rule is now not white. I think I pulled up. Then it was only white at the higher levels of the sport, but for gloves now in New Zealand, the rules are, up till next week when they may change again, that gloves are optional at introductory and preliminary level non-graded classes, but in graded classes, gloves are compulsory, and at the high levels, they must be white, off-white, black, or the same color as the jacket. So yeah, things change and change and change. I always wear white gloves. Again, at a high level, I tend to use brown or black at a lower level. Would I ever do a dressage test with bright pink gloves, even though it looks in these rules that they're allowed? No. I don't think it's meant to be a fashion show. It should be a little understated and a showing of your horse and your training, not a fashion statement or otherwise. So, so I always wear white or very light coloured jodhpurs. They are hard to keep clean. I have about four or five pairs in the truck. I'll often put a new pair on for a prize giving, because by the end of the day, you're often a little bit messy. One little tip that I have, I always seem to ride better if I've been wearing the clothes I'm going to be competing in for quite some time before I get on, rather than right before I get on, putting on my jodhpurs, which always seem to feel a bit tight or a bit stiff or a bit different than what I wear at home, and putting my boots on and then getting straight on the horse. It's quite nice to kind of have that bit of time in your gear before you get on. Sometimes I warm up without my jacket, but sometimes I actually feel like I do better if I've already got my jacket on. That final putting on of the jacket before you go in can add to your kind of nerves, because you suddenly feel different within your body. But again, it depends a little bit on your psychology. A lot of the time, I think it's bad luck. I always do my right zip up before my left zip, and I've got this my spur on my left boot before my right, or whatever, because a lot of athletes have this kind of routine we go through to try and focus or keep our nerves in check. Hopefully none of you are quite as crazy as me.
Superstition, I think you call it.
Yeah, a lot of superstition goes on. But yeah, what I find is a lot of people, for me, spend far too long worrying about that their plaits aren't quite perfect, and that, I had an owner the other day that was like, oh, I'm so sorry, the plaits aren't perfect. I'm like, the judge will not be looking at that. If you have the most perfect white socks with not an ounce of dirt on them. By the time you've got out to the warm-up, your horse has already done a nervous poo. There's, dirt's flowing up, all the rest of it. I want to look really tidy and know I've presented my horse, but I would rather get out to the warm-up 5 minutes early than be busy trying to perfect some little plait or some little speck of dirt or some quarter marker that doesn't quite match the other side, and actually miss out on the important thing, which is riding my horse in the ring. So I think you can really get too worried about how you look. Just get into the routine of having a hairnet, having your helmet on, having everything that you need, but it does not matter that there's a tiny stain on your jodhpurs or that you got slightly dirty as you got on your horse. What matters to the judge is how your horse goes and how you ride when you're in the ring. So I kind of like that about dressage. I kind of like that I don't have to wash my horse 15 times and I'm not being judged on presentation as such, as long as I look, relatively clean and well presented, but I am not going to lose a mark if there's a stain on my jacket before I go in. So
Jody, we've got a question from Jean there about braiding the horse with the long mane in the chat. Have you got the chat there?
Yep, I'll just pull it up.
Braiding a horse with a long mane, do you prefer a running braid or do you pull it and do the little dressage knots?
It depends. I like when I first had Alibaba, he had not a really long mane, but a sizable mane. And it was very thick being a stallion. So I used to do a double, like a Spanish plait on each side. So if you have an Iberian horse, or even if that's just kind of the look you like, there's nothing wrong with that long plait. Yeah, and with a Frisian, I've competed with Frisians that we not only have the long plait, but then it also, because their manes are really long, it also has a long plait running down. Lusitanos tend to be shown at the higher, shown in sport with a short mane and plaited. That is the kind of standard for a Lusitano dressage horse. The Lusitanos at the Olympics and world champs never had a long plait, but a lot of the Spanish horses would. And the Frisians, I don't think I've ever seen a Frisian, a purebred Frisian shown with a short mane. So I wouldn't, if I had a Frisian, I would always leave the mane long and do the long plait. On a Lusitano myself, I would do what the top guys do and have a pulled mane. However, when I first got Alibaba, as I said, I did have the long plait on him. So it depends. That you need to do that long plait, you need a bit of practice, and it can be a little bit restrictive of the horse's neck to make that plait tight enough. I know in Spain, when I was at competitions, they would always plait them like with their heads right up there. And of course, a lot of those horses have a very short kind of a neck. They don't have a lot of expansive neck anyway. And if you had, say, a thoroughbred or a warm blood with a very long mane that you plaited that way, you'll find that by the time you've plaited it, warmed up, gone in the ring, a lot of the time it's pulled really loose. And it does not look as smart. But on those big Spanish stallions whose necks are kind of just glued in the one place, you can keep it really tight and have it looking good. So I think you have to be a little bit careful about that. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine if my plaits start coming undone or getting loose, like while I'm riding. It's like if my stock flies out of my jacket, I'm like, oh my God, like that really puts me off. If I look down and I see a plait falling out. So I like to always have a couple of rubber bands if I've banded my plaits, or even if I've sewn them, I'll often put a rubber band or two in my pocket so that just before I go in the ring, I can reach forward and fix something, because I don't like at least entering the arena with something already falling apart. It kind of spoils the picture and puts me off a little bit. Or making sure if I've got a groom or a helper that they've got kind of a little emergency kit of things that could go wrong when I get to the warm-up, because the warm-up's often miles from where you've left your float or your truck to go back and fix something.